We've got Mr. Brad Quinlan, and Brad is author of over 22 books, or co-author. He's got several of them he's got up here. He's been real instrumental in reenacting. He's been reenacting, what, 30-something years?
33.
33 years. If you ever saw the movie Glory, or Andersonville, or Gettysburg, he was on all three. And he was also instrumental, since he lives over in the North Georgia area, instrumental in getting the new video on Kennesaw Mountain. This was based on his research, and it's the one they show right now at the museum there at Kennesaw Mountain.
And it is super.
It is outstanding.
Thank you.
It is outstanding. And in addition to that, he's also been on the History Channel. If you ever watch the show Diggers, he's been involved in that. He's also been involved in Who Do You Think You Are?
Yeah.
He's done 4 episodes of that where they have these famous people. He goes back and researches. He had Matthew Broderick, if I'm not mistaken, on there. He found his great-great-grandfather, 10th Connecticut?
20th Connecticut Infantry.
20th Connecticut Infantry. He's actually buried in Marietta Cemetery. And he took him there and showed him where he was buried and everything. So he's done a lot of research. Greg, I mean, I know you and David both are really involved in research. He knows how to do a lot of that research. He probably researched here at the library. A lot of stuff here in the library. But we've got a great talk tonight on Samuel Huntington? Hollingsworth Stout. And I think you're going to be real interested to hear some of the things that he's done. He came upon, what'd you say, 2,500 pounds?
2,500 pounds
of documentation that this guy had. And based on that, he's going to give us a talk tonight. We're going to hear a little bit about Dr. Stout. Okay, Brad, without any further ado, it's yours.
Good evening. Thank you. And this brings back a lot of old memories for me because my youngest son went to University of North Alabama here in Florence, Alabama. And he met his future wife, and they had my first grandchild right here. So my wife and I, every month, maybe even twice a month, would shoot over here and spend some time here. And of course, Shiloh and Corinth are so close, so I take off and hit those every now and then. But Aiden was born here in Florence, and he graduates from high school this year. 6'3.5", 282 pounds.
Wow.
And he just got a football scholarship and an academic scholarship to play at the University of Rockford in Illinois.
Wow.
So my little guy that was here, he's now a big guy heading off to college, which is really hard to believe. I started researching when I was 15 years old. Always loved the study of history and researching and just really digging into the nuts and bolts of things. So when we moved south, the Civil War was just one of those things in 1982 to really dig into. And I started hanging out at the Marietta National Cemetery and building up documents from Dr. Chaplain Thomas Van Horn and Alonzo Wainwright. And in getting the documents of the burials of Union soldiers into the Marietta National Cemetery, I can take you to within 5 feet of where every Union soldier was originally buried and tell you what he had on his remains.
Wow.
Just incredible documentation that was left. Documented Matthew Broderick's great-great-grandfather who was in an unknown grave. So I hang out a lot at the Marietta Museum of History. Dan Cox, the founder and the CEO of the museum, and Amy Reed handles all of the archives, the curation. And you know, when I teach people how to research and teach people and tell them how to go through, I say, don't go into a project blind because you're going to miss something if you go in with blinders on. Really get a broad perspective. Well, Amy's sitting up there and we're sitting one night talking about programs, and Amy said, Brad, we've got the largest Confederate cemetery south of Richmond, Virginia, and we have 3,000 unknown Confederates buried there. And just 900 have a name on a wall there. There's got to be records somewhere that tell us the story, that takes us and gives us some information about these men. Well, Amy, I just don't know of anything right now. I just don't have anything on my radar. And she goes, Brad, find something. I've been married for 48 years. When a woman calls my name 3 times, and it's even my mother, I go out and start looking. So I get back to the house and I start digging and just hitting the internet, start going. And one name pops up continuously. Samuel Hollingsworth Stout. Samuel Hollingsworth Stout. So I find out that he left records in 5 universities across the country. 2,500 pounds of Civil War hospital records. One of them is at Emory University. They had about 3% of his records there. So I drive down to Emory, make an appointment to see him, and they have some of little individual records. Then go to Dan. I said, Dan, they've got records at the University of North Carolina, Duke, University of Tennessee, and 85% of these records are out at the University of Texas in Austin. They have 84 boxes of these records. Go get them, Brad. So he went and gave me funding, and we went out and spent 5 days at a Days Inn across the street from the university. Had to walk about a mile over to the Briscoe American History Library. Now they have these records microfilmed today. I want to hold the original stuff. Microfilm, sometimes the image isn't good, and the microfilm operator may get bored on a Friday night and just put the stuff in a box, sack out.
Right.
Okay, I want the originals. So I begged him for a month before I went. Okay, Brad, we'll pull them out of the archives. You can handle it. So I started pulling and taking photographs of these records. 16,500 documents.
Wow.
So we hit it, and I get them and I bring them back. Samuel Hollingsworth Stout had 3 medical degrees. He was born in Tennessee in 1822, had 3 medical degrees before his 16th birthday. His older brother had 2 medical degrees. When the war started, he enlisted in the 3rd Tennessee Infantry CS. By middle of 1862, General Braxton Bragg had seen Stout and how he operated, the things that he did. There it is. Braxton Bragg. We can go by him quick, right? And so he saw him. So he put him in charge of all the hospitals in his army. The way Stout set up his hospitals, the way he ventilated his tents, everything he did was used through World War I. He was so innovative. You can see this is the design of his hospital. Remember now, we're in 1862. We're not seeing the casualties before in our history that we're seeing now. Most of the hospitals, like in Chimborazo, Virginia, and those, their mortality rate was 31 to 33%. In Stout's hospitals, consistently, through the end of the war, 3.7 to 3.9%.
Wow.
The guys that came in had a survival rate that was unbelievable. And the way he set up his tents, you can see specifically 10 feet apart, specifically set within the lines and formatting. This is his drawing that he put out with each of his surgeons. Something else he did, a nurse stayed in that tent for the entire shift. They didn't travel from tent to tent, exposing the germs from one tent to the other. Amputees, wounded, they were put in a tent or in a building by themselves. They weren't intermingled with other ones. If you had typhoid or smallpox, there was a hospital set up a mile away from the main hospital that was called the Pest Hospital. Confederate hospitals were named after the surgeon that was in charge of those hospitals, so you could carry them through, except for one, and that was the Academy Hospital, which was done from the Academy in Nashville. Now, I'm going to show you a ton of documents, but I want you to understand the depth of his work, the monthly inventories that you would see. Every hospital building had to have an inventory done every month. I can tell you how many patients came in, what they were treated for, when medicines were received at the hospital, and any injury the guys went through. On the back of these monthly reports, You could see the changing morning reports every morning of everything. You knew exactly what was happening to each guy every morning. You don't see this in many major hospitals today, let alone what you're seeing from Stout. Then there was an invoice coming of everything that came in. In Marietta, Georgia, on December 13th, 1864, in a local group of medicines on one invoice, they had 14 and a half bottles of whiskey that came in. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd only sign for 14 because that other half of the bottle of whiskey would be gone. But that'd tell you how incredible the documentation, invoices on everything. Every soldier, there are stacks of these cards that were 4 boxes that were this thick. Every soldier that came in through the history of his Civil War hospitals had one of these cards made out to what he was treated when he came in. Now, early on, when they were released from the hospital and they weren't well enough to go back to the regiments, they had no place to go. So they'd mingle around maybe with the sick, get sick again. So Stout set up what was called a convalescent camp that was a mile away from the tent. You were given one of these cards to go from the hospital to the convalescent. You had 30 days. You were given another one to report back to the regiment. It stopped confusion and desertion by almost 41%. Everybody was being tracked throughout. And it was, I'll tell you, it took a long time to photograph each one of those cards. Now this is again, a morning report, sick and wounded, what was in every single hospital building. When each of the buildings, when he went, he'd send out John R. Jordan, who was assistant secretary, to a site. And remember, Stout started 1862 up to south of Nashville. He was taking his hospitals continually on the move back to Atlanta. So he'd send out John R. Porter to look at these. He would take every building that he would need. And he would document by the inch, by the centimeter, and how many beds could go in each room. So before Stout moved his hospitals into the individual towns, he already had plans set up. And the Marietta Museum of History building was used as the A.J. Ford Hospital. We actually know who was in each room the entire time it was used as a Confederate hospital, and what came in, and then what happened to each man. On the back, and this was one of the things that led us to some important documentation, on the back of each report, who died in that hospital, and the date of death and the cause. So we have Kingston Cemetery, Confederate Cemetery, Marietta National, with 3,000 unknowns. Jonesboro, that had about 400 unknown Confederates. The Atlanta Confederate Cemetery, anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 unknown Confederates, and we don't know the number. We took these records from each particular hospital, correlated them, cross-ID'd them, and we've been able to tell you now over 1,000 Confederate soldiers what cemetery they're buried in. Over 350 in the Confederate Cemetery in Marietta. In 2013, we put up 2 new walls in the Confederate Cemetery with 350 names of men we know that are buried in the cemetery. We can't tell you exactly which one was in each grave, because we don't even know if the headstones are over. And again, a listing, just general listing. And these are 84 boxes, 16,000 documents within it. Now, you had to set up an operation plan. He started from scratch, set continually an operations plan up. So this was what each task of each person had to do. And they had to read this and sign into it. So he was bringing in soldiers to be used as nurses and local citizens that were being used. Now, we all hear as he's getting the armies out of Chattanooga, the hospitals back into Kingston, Cassville, and Marietta as the Atlanta campaign is getting ready to start in 1864. On April 19th, 1864, Jordan writes Samuel Stout, who was in Kingston at the time handling his operations. He writes, "Dear Sir, we need to move the hospitals out of Cobb County. There is no resources left to take care of our sick and wounded. I suggest we move our hospitals to Paulding County. There is barely one chicken left alive in Cobb County." So when you go to Cobb County and you go onto Highway 41 and you see the monument of the KFC with the big chicken on it, that's a monument to the last surviving chicken in Cobb County on April 28, 1864.
Wrong Kool-Aid.
But he just continually. On June 28, 64, after Sherman made his attack on the Confederate works of June 27, General Johnston ordered Stout to remove all his hospitals from Marietta. He did it in 4 days. Did not leave a wounded or sick man there. Wagons, he used the train when he could. Commandeered mules, whatever. When Union surgeons moved in to open up the Union hospitals on July 4th, a letter from Samuel Thomas Johnson, who was a 14th Army Corps surgeon, said, "When they moved the hospitals out of Marietta, they did not leave us anything, not even bed ticking to use. Everything was gone." So that's how unbelievable operation. These were letters in cross-sectioning through it. Again, the unbelievable documentation. And this is the Institute Hospital, that all the operations that go into it. Now, I had a group of the Sons of Confederate Veterans come to me and say, "Brad, we want to know what buildings were used in Kingston as hospitals. But we don't have any big buildings back in the 1860s. We have a couple of churches. We want to identify, were they used as hospitals?" Well, I find this sketch and document. There were no hospital buildings to be used in Kingston. Stout designed these sheds to be used as cover for the men, so they didn't have to stay out in the open during bad weather. He actually, you can see on the side, they have the tent flaps that they can put down in bad weather, but they could open them up for the weather to get the germs out. So now we know in Kingston, they had 48 of these sheds that he built. Again, some more incredible documentation in the scope. And as you're going through and you're photographing this stuff, I was on my tiptoes with my camera photographing a lot of this stuff and going through. I can tell you the doctors, when they were there, everything, just unbelievable, the documentation in the scope of everything. And I know it's just hard to fathom it. Okay, in the middle of box 67, as I'm photographing, there's this article, Andersonville. Why did Stout have an article from a Wisconsin newspaper on Andersonville? As it turns out, Samuel Hollingsworth Stout went down to Americus and the railroad depot at Andersonville. He picked out the property of Andersonville site to be used as a hospital in need. He never did, so in February of 64, they brought it in and used Andersonville as the prison camp. August of 1864, Stout's in Atlanta working. He hears all the atrocities that are going on in Andersonville. He takes a train down to Macon and then horse over to the Andersonville. He meets with Henry Wirtz. And he says to Wirtz, "Why are you letting things go like they are? Why are things deteriorating? You had money to build huts for these men, buildings for hospitals, and buy food and medicine and clothing." Wirtz said, "I didn't get there for a whole month before it was open. There's no money here." Stout went looking and investigating. He found Confederate surgeon John Stevenson stole the money.
Wow.
head out to California. He was bringing up the evidence and was going to charge him with the crime.
Wow. Wow.
What kind of difference would that money have made in purchasing goods and stuff? What kind of difference would it made at the outcome and the death rate there?
What was that sergeant's name of the charge?
Stevenson. He was on Isaiah White's staff at Andersonville, the hospital surgeon down there. So that was a huge change. And I actually, 2 years ago, the Wirt's descendants came over and I met them at Andersonville at the monument and presented them with that documentation. Now Stout, we get to the end of the war. Stout's moving his hospitals after Atlanta, Macon, Noonan, into Alabama, Montgomery, Birmingham. And the war is closing down. You've got sick and wounded Confederate soldiers in all these hospitals. What do? How do you take care of these men? Stout kept the hospitals in Birmingham, Montgomery, and Macon open till July of '66. So that these men could be taken care of. He raised money as local ladies had bake sales. Made cookies and cakes and had bake sales, and they did quilt sales. So he was able to keep those hospitals open. After the war, he settled in Roswell, Georgia for a while, and he happened to be a great admirer of Davy Crockett. He wrote a book on Davy Crockett. And he wrote a book on Braxton Bragg. The Roswell Printing Company only printed 100 of these. I had a good friend that found one. He paid $3,000 for the copy of it. Stout does not say a bad word about Bragg. He says Bragg's unsuccessful attempts as an Army commander was because of the jealousy of his subordinate officers. But he greatly admired Braxton Bragg. He actually wrote The History of America from 1767 till 1845. He became the first superintendent of the Atlanta public school system in 1871. And he would write a dissertation on how to take care of our public schools. And he said, if the idiot politicians, when we had bad economic times, would keep their hands out of our schools would survive if we keep the government out of it.
Amen.
Well, there was a lot of foresight in that one, wasn't
Some things never take
there? Now this, I had no idea what this is from. There's some doodling there, but there was no context of this, but it's too good to leave out of a presentation. Stout's artistic. He went on after to help open and expand what we know as the Atlanta Medical College. Today it's Emory. Went up to North Carolina, help open their medical college. Went down to Baylor, help open their medical college, and then finally to Texas to help with their medical school. In 1902, they had the national encampment of Sons of Confederate Veterans in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he was the keynote speaker. And he got up and he said, our numbers are thinning and we're getting grayer. But I am always proud of what we did. Our doctors, our surgeons, our nurses, we saved many lives. And as we are thinning down, always be proud of what we did in that 4 years. And this will probably be the last time many of us are together. The next year, he died and is buried in that small grave with that headstone in Clarendon, Texas. Now, if you're a descendant of a Confederate soldier in the Atlanta campaign or anywhere in Georgia, and he was in the hospital at any time, how many of you are here today because of what he did? Right? How many people are out there? What have they done good in our nation because of what Stout did? And when I talked to UDC groups and SCV groups, I said, I mean, it's unbelievable how few people know about him and his work that he did. I say, something's got to be done. We've got to do something to recognize him So the Colquitt Kent of UDC have created an award, the Stout Award, and they give it out to medical people, EMTs that do something above and beyond. So his name still goes on today. He left his family destitute, his son and 2 daughters, and they had to sell the records to the University of Texas. And that's why we still have them today. Wow. But imagine all that time during the war, moving these hospitals, moving around like he did after the war, and we have those today to go through. Absolutely unbelievable. Any questions at all? Anything I can take? Yes.
Did you run across any of the hospitals at Griffin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there is hospitals at Griffin.
Yeah, I knew there were, but I just wondered if there were any records left.
Yeah.
That's where mine was sent when he got wounded.
Oh, Griffin.
Yeah. I got my card, so email me
Okay.
and I'll send a memory stick with you on what I can find on the Griffin hospitals.
Thank you.
And you can search through them.
Oh, good. That will be a fun day.
Yeah.
And I'm being sarcastic.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in your patients in Marietta. My great-great-grandfather had his thumb shot loose, so it was a dangling thumb for the rest of his life, but that's where he went after the Battle of Missionary Ridge. So that would give the time that he went down to Marietta. Would he be in your records? Would he be easily found or
He
not?
should, yeah, and it's a chore to find him. Because as Jim Ogden, the historian at Chickamauga says, these records are organized in a disorganizational fashion. So you'll have an envelope that say Griffin Hospitals, but you'll find Jonesboro, you'll find Chattanooga. So you really got to go through them all. Most likely he is in one of the records from Marietta, and there's about just that 8,000 documents from Marietta because they were there for such a long time. So there's a bunch. Take my card and send me his name and let me see if, because we went through the Marietta records quite extensively, so let me see if we may have those.
Brad, was he a general officer? Was he an actual general, or what was his rank?
Yeah, he was just, they called him Dr. Stout.
Okay, did he have a commission as a general?
You know, I can't find anywhere whether he was actually commissioned in the Confederate Army.
Okay.
He is never recognized with a military insignia anywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Did his brother also serve?
And there's no record.
No record of his brother?
No record of his brother, what he did. So he's lost to history right now.
Wow.
Did you have a question, sir?
Well, I was just going to say, what I've seen in some research is that in Confederate service, if you had the title assistant surgeon, that was equivalent to a captain. Yeah. A surgeon was a major, and then there were some inspector grades, and then there was a surgeon general who might have been a brigadier level officer.
And I think that was due to pay.
Yeah,
in a pay ranking. Yeah. So, but in any of the records, any of his writings or anything, there's no.
He's not referred to as surgeon or inspector surgeon.
No. I mean, just general surgeon in charge of Confederate hospital.
That may have been, that may have been what we call surgeon general now.
Yes.
They give him the general staff, but he never did talk about what kind of pay he got.
In your pictures of him, the existent pictures don't show a rank insignia on any of the uniforms or anything.
No. I mean, it looks like he's got a military coat, but I don't see, the insignia on it. So.
When Bragg left the Army of Tennessee to go back to Charleston, did he stay with the Army of Tennessee or did he go with Bragg?
And he stayed down in Georgia and Alabama because he kept those hospitals open.
Okay.
So everything gets him in Griffin or Macon at those reports.
So he basically stayed with the Army of Tennessee. Yeah. He didn't move back up with Bragg when Bragg went back up to Carolina.
No, because Bragg didn't take any major hospital systems with him. He moved pretty quick at that point. Yes, sir.
And two other questions. Two of my great-great-grandfathers were from Giles County, from the Minor Hill area near Pulaski.
Uh-huh.
And I understand that Stout was from Midbridge, which I can't find anywhere where Midbridge is in Giles County.
Yeah.
Any idea?
And you know, I think it's north of Pulaski.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
It's just not much up there.
Yeah, and I went, I had a talk I gave in Huntsville, and I went up north just to go into Pulaski to see if I could have, they had any records, and they didn't have anything that talked about where he lived or.
Yeah, but because it looked like there were reports that he actually practiced medicine in Giles County at some point, and in Nashville as a private physician.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was before he went to Texas and did the Baylor and.
Because he traveled quite a bit. There's been 2 books that were written about him. One was a doctorate that, it's very technical, not at the human aspect of Stout. It's very technical. And then Confederate Hospitals on the Move doesn't get into a lot, the specifics, but it had a disc where you got some of the records are on it. But he didn't go out to a ton of getting all of them.
Were you able to search the records at the other locations, or I know you mentioned North Carolina?
Yeah, I got
Marietta.
got to all the 5 universities and
Okay.
got all their records. And you want to see the microfilm? Nope. All right, we'll give you
It's
the.
difficult, yeah.
I go up to National Archives quite a bit working for clients, and you go up there, and if you go to Fold 3. I don't know if any of you have ever used Fold 3.
Yeah.
Fold 3 is terrible. They used to be really good when it was footnote.com, but then they got volunteers to use, instead of when it was bought out, became Fold 3, they got volunteers. October before COVID hit, I was up at the archives, and Trevor Plants, the assistant director of military records in DC Archives. I said, Trevor, how come they're not using any, Fold 3's not putting a lot of stuff out? Oh, you haven't heard? I said, know what? Well, we caught them stealing documents and throwing documents in the garbage.
Oh, no.
So we fired them. Really? So then I go up the first time they open up after COVID, and I go and I say, yeah, Trevor, I see they're putting stuff back up again. Oh yeah, we worked out a new contract and hired him back. And they found out the original guy with the archives that worked out the Fold 3 contract was actually getting a kickback from Fold 3.
Was his name Stevenson too?
It might have been, But I'll tell you, I have clients and I've pulled stuff for them, and they may have 8 records on a pension record on Fold 3, and I'll get the original documents, and there's 50, 60, 70 documents. My 6th great grandfather, Landrum Eggers, who was with the 5th New York Light Infantry during the Rev War. When I pulled it in 93, it had 78 documents.
Wow.
When they put it up on Fold 3, 35. Even the staff at the archives is extremely upset with what's going on.
Good gracious.
But they can't do anything. And something I'd really like to get into that is really, right before COVID, they found 350,000 Confederate documents in 17 boxes, hidden away in the corner of the archives.
Wow.
Right before COVID, they made them available for research. And I'd love to get my hands on them, because a group of them are quartermaster records.
Yeah.
Everything that was purchased by every state, from France, from Britain, from Belgium, is on record. And the ports, Savannah and Charleston, every ship that came in, the bill of lading is actually documented in these records.
Wow.
So there's some cool stuff in the way in those archives. Yes, sir.
Question I've got is, my wife's great-great-grandfather was in the 41st Tennessee. He was wounded at Raymond and then sent to Newton Station.
Okay.
In his military records, his muscle records, it shows him then being a nurse. He's like 1 month, he's still recovering, then he's a nurse. And he stays a nurse until after the Battle of Chattanooga. My question has been, because it doesn't say where he is, he's just a nurse. Did those nurses like that, did they follow the Army? And could he have possibly been in a hospital located on the battlefield maybe?
Well, or at least in one of the cities and the major hospital sites. What happened was if a soldier came in and he never fully recovered where he could go back to fight, they had him as a nurse.
Yeah.
So that he could, they not going to let him go home because they needed manpower, so they used him as a
He
nurse.
actually went back into service.
So he might have got healthy enough.
Yeah,
to
he
go
was
back.
in there by the time of Kennesaw Mountain.
Okay.
And that was one of my worst experiences on the battlefield. Because we went all the way up the top of that mountain and walked all the way to the bottom of it on that one trail to get to where their camp was. Got ate up by mosquitoes and then had to walk all the way back up to the top of it to get to our car. And I thought I was going to die on the battlefield before I got out. But we enjoyed it.
We're having our anniversary programs the 24th and 25th out at Kennesaw. Come on out, I'll suit you up in a uniform and you can hang out with us for 3 days. And you'll never be more miserable in your life.
It gave me a thought about what they had to have gone through, because it had been a lot worse than what I went through.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
and one other thing, when you're talking about this, at the courthouse in Florence, they have all their stuff on microfilm, but it's not anything like going down and setting in, because sometimes you get part of the page, the edge of the page, you can't read the last words on it or whatever. And so I always just go in and look at the original stuff. That's what I've always done too.
Yeah.
And it works a whole lot better.
It does, and I'll call the state archives in Tennessee and say, I want to get the Alonzo Wainwright records. They're on microfilm, but I really want the original documents. All right. An hour later, they'll call back, Brad, we got your permission to use the documents. We looked you up, and you can use the original documents.
Wow.
Yeah.
A couple of indirect comments on family lineage and genealogy that pertain to Alabama. Hollingsworth is a noted family with Revolutionary War credentials and became Quakers in North Carolina for a time before moving into northeast Georgia right after the Revolutionary War. Alabama happens to have migrants who came into Fayette County, Alabama, so there's a cluster of Hollingsworths there.
Okay.
One of which was the former University of Alabama quarterback about 1990, a woman named Gary Hollingsworth. And then the other thing on the Stouts, just south of us here, is a Stouts Crossroads in Franklin County. And on the other side of Franklin County, actually in the border of Marion County, there was a John Stout. And in the Civil War, he was a Yankee sympathizer and operated a group of banditos. And General Grant called him the greatest spy he had when he was in Corinth, Mississippi area. So in any event, Stouts were on both sides of the war.
Oh, yeah.
And they all came out of, the ones that were here came out of Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, you get back into your lineage, people think it's one thing, and then when you get back, it totally blows everything out of the water.
It was definitely a house divided, yeah.
Yeah.
So where are you from?
I was born in Illinois,
Whereabouts?
Monmouth, Illinois.
Okay.
My grandmother had the house next to the Wyatt Earp's home in Monmouth. And when I was 6, went to Indianapolis. And then when I was 12, in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And grew up in Pittsfield, Mass.
Okay. I grew up in Terre Haute.
Terre Haute?
Yeah. So I was
You
just
didn't see a Notre Dame fan?
No.
I thought I had one here in Alabama with me.
No, but my first cousin and all them that live up near South Bend, they're all big. They're all big Notre Dame.
I like that part of the family.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you ever been to the Jonesboro, Georgia Cemetery?
Yes, many times.
So you do know about the Confederate cross? But
Yes.
so.
Yeah.
Just real quick, this is more of an opinion question, but you briefly touched on the focus of my Civil War studies, that being the prison stockade at Camp Sumter. In reading the transcripts of Wirtz's trial, apparently they were very favorable of Dr. Isaiah White. And
Yes.
of course he leaves, and then Stevenson takes over, and of course he's faced with the height of the overcrowding. But, you know, everybody's always pointed fingers at Wirtz and General Winder, but as far as the debacle in the hospital and that high mortality rate, you say you lay the whole, or the majority of the blame at the foot of Dr. Stevenson?
A good bit of it. It's the start of the collapse. Okay, it wasn't all of it. Wirtz was ordering from Macon resources, and he was getting a quarter of what he was ordering. And the prison was built for 10,000 men at its max. It got up to be 33,000 prisoners at a time. And some of the prisoners were their own worst enemies inside the prison itself. And if you read, I pulled from the archives the transcripts of the witnesses during the trial. If you read it, the prosecutor actually asked the question exactly identical every single time to every prisoner. And the prisoner response back is almost identical. You can't tell. I mean, it's just like they were perfectly tutored on how to give it. And then the most damning witness at Andersonville for Wirtz wasn't even at Andersonville. So it was just a set of circumstances that got to the point where they couldn't do anything, you know. And he's begging them not to, please don't send any more prisoners here, and they'd send him more. And
So Winder died before the war was over.
yes,
If Winder had been alive, he would have been the one that got executed instead of Wirtz.
it probably, but maybe both of them.
Yeah.
At that point, when I did my book on Andersonville, I was a volunteer down there for 38 years, and Mark Stibbets, his wife, was head of the cemetery for 28 years. And we wanted to do something a little bit different than what was being out, because marble, everybody kind of takes it from the one perspective. And one of the things we wanted to do was find guard letters. Because, you know, get away from, okay, the guard, the hatred, the guards. You know, we shot a prisoner every week. Didn't happen. And so I went out searching, and I found 7 guard letters from the 63rd Alabama when they were there. And they talk about the compassion they had. And then I met a guy whose great-great-grandfather was at Andersonville, and he had a letter that 10 prisoners were being exchanged. They gave a guard a pocket watch and this letter thanking them for letting them get extra food, for taking them out to let them, you know, supply surplus to their diets. You know, so a lot of this is just, you know, the anger of after the war. And that excerpt from the Wisconsin newspaper really goes against the execution of Wirtz.
Right.
That it wasn't within the scope. I mean, it was, you know, the anger after the war. You had some prisoners coming home emaciated, angry. The families got angry. And that just ballooned. After President Lincoln was assassinated, they got to have somebody's head.
Yeah.
And up at the University of Notre Dame, I had a good friend that was curator at the library there, let me in. William Denver was Wirtz's lawyer. And I got into his papers, and he said that he had asked for 223 witnesses for the defense. They allowed him 28.
Oh, wow.
And he said, he wrote his wife about 3 weeks before the trial. He said, my dearest wife, I took this case because of everyone else that was assigned to it from our firm. I was the only one that would do the job the way it was supposed to be done. I would not walk through it. I'm going to give him the best trial I can. But Wirtz is a broken man, and I cannot get him to defend himself. This trial has already been decided. Wirtz will be hung. Yes,
One more question. In your research down around Andersonville, there at the
yeah.
prison camp, did you ever run into General Neal coming down there. I don't know if they would have been called general, but, his name is Alfred Sidney, let's do it. Alfred Asbury O'Neill. He, I don't know if he was a brigade, had a brigade
Yeah,
down
he
there.
was a brigade commander, and.
And they were sent down there to relieve some other.
And O'Neill had some very negative things to say about the way the prison was being kept, and he was very upset, and they got rid of it. He got rid of him and his regiment while they were there because they didn't want the publicity.
Yeah.
But he was kind of rocking the boat, saying things needed to change and stuff like that.
Yeah, when I was down there, they didn't know anything.
Well, you know, the problem with our park service now, nobody cares.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody cares. We've got 4 historians left at Civil War parks now.
Is that right?
And when they retire, you know, Willie Johnson at Kennesaw, when he retired, they didn't replace him. And nobody cares. You know, I'll go down there and they got park rangers giving tours now. They won't even let us give tours anymore.
Oh, wow.
And so park ranger gets transferred in, he's an intern. They shove some paperwork, says give a tour. Really?
And they have to be politically correct now, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You
Golly.
see that at Corinth.
Golly forbid. It's got to be politically correct now. But yeah, you know, and I was doing a lot of stuff cleaning up some of my 3 libraries and archives room that I have at the house, and I just found some letters from some prisoners at Andersonville, at W.W. Powell at West Virginia, and he talks about the kindness of the guards and how that he wouldn't have survived and his friends wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for the kindness, you know, extra food being brought in, or if they were allowed to go out on wood decal, they were allowed to grab food and bring it in. So kind of not what you
They wouldn't allow that testimony at trial, though, wouldn't they?
No.
Well, according to, I believe it was Jefferson Davis, the prisons in New York were not much better.
Oh, Elmira was terrible. Camp Douglas was just as bad because the guy who was the first commandant at Camp Douglas, he skimmed a quarter of the money going to be used to help the prisoners there. And man, you know, if you're ever up in Chicago in March, it's devastating, let alone being up there in January and February.
Johnson Island?
Oh, Johnson Island.
My 4th great grandfather was captured in Muldrow Hill, Kentucky. He was in Indiana regiment. Went back to Camp Morton in Indianapolis. Got pneumonia while he was there and sent him home and he died. He was fine until he went to the prison camp.
Yeah.
You know? So,
Well, guys, that was a great presentation.
Thank you.